Colonel Terence Fornoff climbed out of his F-15E Strike Eagle after Northern Edge 2006 and told reporters something that still sounds broken. 144-0. That's kills to losses. Over 2 weeks of the largest air combat exercise in the Pacific, F-22 Raptors flew against the best fighters in the American inventory. F-15s, F-16s, F-18s, and not a single Raptor took a simulated hit. 144-0. The scoreboard reads like a software glitch. It wasn't. The after-action reports confirm every number. Raptor pilots described engagements where they launched simulated AMRAAMs at targets that never knew they existed. Blue Force adversaries, seasoned fighter pilots with thousands of hours, reported the same thing from the other side. They died without ever getting a radar lock. Some never saw the F-22 on any sensor at all. I can't see him, I can't find him, and he just killed me. One F-15 pilot's debrief, quoted in Aviation Week, stripped the frustration down to 11 words. 3 technologies made that scoreboard possible, and no other fighter on Earth combined all 3. First, low observable shaping and radar-absorbent materials that reduced the Raptor's radar cross-section to roughly the size of a steel marble, about 1/100th of a square meter, depending on aspect angle. Sources conflict on the exact figure. Lockheed has never published one. Second, the AN/APG, 77 active electronically scanned array radar, capable of tracking multiple targets at ranges exceeding 125 miles while operating in low probability of intercept mode, meaning the Raptor could see without being seen looking. Third, supercruise, twin Pratt & Whitney F-119PW, 100 engines pushing the airframe past Mach 1.5 without afterburner. Sustained supersonic flight that burned less fuel and left no telltale infrared bloom for enemy sensors to chase. Each technology existed in isolation before the Raptor. Stealth lived on the F-117. AESA radar prototypes sat in test labs. The Concorde supercruise technically. Nobody had welded all 3 into a single airframe that could also pull 9Gs and outmaneuver an F-16 at 20,000 feet. The program that built it nearly died 4 separate times. Budget cuts in '97. A production cap in 2009 that froze the fleet at 187 airframes, less than half the original buy of 381. Congressional critics called it a Cold War relic hunting for a mission. Too expensive, too specialized, and too few to justify the price tag. The unit flyaway cost hit roughly $143 million per jet. Stories like this one, procurement fights, classified test data, the pilots who proved the math right, they vanish when the men who flew stop talking. A like or a subscribe, a comment about which aircraft deserves the next deep dive. That's what keeps these records in front of people who care. The doubters had a point about the cost. They had no answer for 144-0. Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, Ohio, summer of 1981. A small group of Tactical Air Command officers sat in a windowless briefing room and laid out a problem they couldn't solve with anything flying. The Soviet Union had fielded the MiG-29 and the Su-27, 2 fighters that closed the performance gap American pilots had enjoyed since Vietnam. Worse, Soviet integrated air defenses had grown dense enough to threaten even the F-15, the reigning king of air superiority. TAC wanted a replacement. They called the requirement the Advanced Tactical Fighter. The ask bordered on fantasy, a fighter that combined stealth with supersonic cruise speed, extreme agility, and beyond visual range lethality. No trade-offs. Every previous stealth design, the Have Blue Demonstrator, the F-117, sacrificed maneuverability for low observability. The ATF demanded both. 7 contractors submitted proposals. By 1986, the field narrowed to 2. Lockheed's YF-22 partnered with Boeing and General Dynamics against Northrop's YF-23, partnered with McDonnell Douglas. The fly-off consumed 4 years and billions of dollars. Both prototypes flew. Both demonstrated supercruise. The YF-23 actually posted a higher top speed and a lower radar cross-section in certain test configurations. Lockheed won in April of 1991. The Air Force cited superior agility and a more mature weapons integration plan. Northrop engineers disagreed with that assessment for decades. The selection file remains partially classified. Then, the Soviet Union collapsed. Within months, the rationale for the entire program evaporated in the eyes of Congress. No more Su-27 threat. No more massive Soviet frontal aviation poised to sweep through the Fulda Gap. Defense budgets contracted hard. The peace dividend, Washington's favorite phrase in 1992, meant cutting programs that existed to fight a country that no longer existed. The Cold War is over. Why are we buying a Cold War fighter? Senator Dale Bumpers posed that question during a 1993 Appropriations Committee hearing. The congressional record preserves it. He wasn't alone. The Government Accountability Office published a report in 1995 recommending the Air Force consider canceling the Raptor outright and buying more F-15Es instead, at roughly one-third the unit cost. The Air Force fought back with classified briefings. Emerging threat assessments pointed to Chinese and Russian export fighters proliferating across the Middle East and Asia. The Su-30 family, advanced surface-to-air missile systems from Moscow's defense bureaus, reaching markets that couldn't have afforded them 5 years earlier. The threat hadn't vanished. It had scattered. Congress kept cutting anyway. The original buy of 750 airframes dropped to 381 in 1997. Engineering and manufacturing development costs held roughly fixed, which meant each surviving jet absorbed a larger share. The per-unit price climbed. Critics pointed to the climbing price as evidence the program should die. The price climbed because they kept cutting, a feedback loop that nearly strangled the Raptor in its crib. Dick Cheney, serving as Secretary of Defense under George H.W. Bush, had already tried to kill the program once in 1990. Robert Gates would finish the job on production in 2009. Between those two men, the engineers at Lockheed's Skunk Works built the most dominant air superiority fighter ever to fly. Ben Rich handed Lockheed's stealth team a directive in the mid-'80s that sounded like an engineering contradiction. Make it invisible and make it fight. The F-117 proved stealth worked. It also flew like a bathtub with wings. Faceted surfaces scattered radar energy, but created so much aerodynamic drag, the jet needed a flight computer running 40 times per second just to stay airborne. No pilot could have managed the instability manually. Dogfighting in that airframe meant dying in it. Stealth demanded flat surfaces, sharp edges, internal weapons carriage. Agility pulled in the opposite direction. Curved lifting bodies, exposed control surfaces, external hardpoints for ordnance, and supercruise needed clean aerodynamics with enormous sustained thrust. Each requirement attacked the other two. The shaping problem alone consumed years. Lockheed's engineers moved past the F-117's faceted approach to continuous curvature surfaces, smoothly blended compound curves that scattered radar returns without the drag penalty of flat panels. The computational modeling required didn't exist when the ATF program launched. Cray supercomputers at Lockheed's Burbank facility ran electromagnetic simulations around the clock. Alan Brown, the program's low observables director, later described the process as designing an aircraft in a mirror. Every line drawn for two masters simultaneously, aerodynamics and radar signature, with neither allowed to win. Then, thrust vectoring. The Pratt & Whitney F-119 engine's two-dimensional vectoring nozzles pitched 20 degrees up and down, giving the Raptor post-stall maneuverability that looked wrong in flight. The nose tracking targets, while the airframe hung at angles of attack exceeding 60 degrees. Test pilot Paul Metz described his first high-alpha demonstration at Edwards in 1997. The desert horizon tilting past the canopy rail at an angle no conventional fighter could sustain. The jet hanging in heated air that smelled like burnt kerosene, even through the oxygen mask, controllable the entire time. Supercruise tied all of it together. Sustained Mach 1.5 plus without afterburner meant the F-119s had to produce 35,000 pounds of thrust each in military power, dry, no reheat. For context, the F-15's F-100 engines produced roughly 23,800 pounds in the same regime, 50% more thrust per engine from a power plant that weighed about the same. Internal weapons bays carried 6 AIM-120 AMRAAMs and 2 AIM-9 Sidewinders without disturbing the stealth profile. The bay doors opened for roughly 1 second during a launch sequence. Radar cross-section spiked momentarily, then vanished. 1 second of visibility, then gone. 0600 hours, June 12, 2006, Elmendorf Air Force Base, Alaska. 12 F-22s from the 1st Fighter Wing at Langley taxied through fog so thick the wingmen navigated by GPS. Across the exercise area, a block of airspace stretching from the Alaskan coast into the Gulf of Alaska, roughly the size of Florida, 40 adversary aircraft waited. F-15Cs and Es from Elmendorf and Kadena, F-16s from Misawa, Navy F-18E, Super Hornets off the carrier Abraham Lincoln. The best pilots from 4 branches spread across a layered defensive network backed by AWACS, ground-based radar, and simulated SA-20 surface-to-air batteries. The rules of engagement permitted beyond visual range shots validated by the exercise's tracking system, ACMI pods, recording every aircraft's position, altitude, heading, and simulated weapons employment in real time. No fudging the numbers. The computers scored kills and credited losses automatically. By day 3, Blue Force mission commanders noticed something they hadn't seen before. Their jets kept dying before the merge. F-15 pilots with 10-15 years of experience reported getting kill notifications from the ACMI system without ever seeing a contact on radar. No radar warning receiver activation. No visual tally. Just the automated call. You're dead. Reset and re-enter the fight. They re-entered. They died again. Major Kevin Grunwald, flying with the 27th Fighter Squadron's Raptor detachment, described the experience from the other side in a post-exercise interview with Air Force magazine. We'd enter the battle space, get the picture, and start shooting before they even knew we were there. He paused. It wasn't fair. The Raptor's sensor fusion painted every adversary on a single God's eye display. Tracks from the APG-77, data-linked information from AWACS, infrared search data, all merged into one picture, requiring zero pilot interpretation. Grunwald and his wingmen could allocate targets between them with a button press while cruising at Mach 1.5 at 45,000 feet. Below them, F-15s burned fuel in afterburner, searching for contacts that had already killed them. 144 to 0. Over the full 2-week exercise, the tracking system recorded every engagement. Nobody at Elmendorf disputed the count. What do you do with a fighter that breaks every exercise it enters? Red flag. Nellis Air Force Base, February 2007. The Raptors' first appearance at the Air Force's premier combat training exercise. Aggressor squadrons flying F-16s painted in Russian flanker camouflage had spent years humbling cocky fighter pilots from every allied nation. They studied Soviet and Chinese tactics full-time. They flew dissimilar air combat 6 days a week. These weren't regular squadron pilots moonlighting as bad guys. They were professionals at losing correctly, so others could learn to win. They couldn't find the Raptors. Colonel Tom Bergeson, commanding the 6th 95th Aggressor Squadron, acknowledged the problem publicly. His pilots adapted tactics between sorties, spreading formations wider, varying altitudes, queuing off AWACS callouts. The Raptors killed them anyway. Bergeson's aggressors tried hugging the terrain to exploit ground clutter against the APG-77. The radar handled it. They tried swarming with numerical superiority, 4-on-1 ratios. The sensor fusion sorted targets faster than any human formation could reposition. The Blue Pelican, that's the informal name for the small blue silhouette sticker Raptor pilots placed on their jets for each exercise kill. By the end of Red Flag 07, some aircraft carried so many stickers, the crew chiefs ran out of room near the canopy rail. The operational absurdity became obvious almost immediately. Training doctrine requires a credible threat to produce useful lessons. A fighter that wins every engagement at beyond visual range without ever being detected teaches its own pilots very little about handling adversity. Red flag planners started handicapping the Raptor, restricting it to visual range-only engagements, limiting its weapons loadout, forcing pilots to operate without data link. Artificial constraints designed to make the world's most advanced fighter act like something worse than itself, so other pilots could get reps. The diamondback rattlesnake navigates total darkness, using infrared sensing pit organs between its eyes and nostrils, detecting temperature differentials as small as 0.003 of a degree Celsius. This connects to nothing about fighter aircraft, but it's the kind of evolutionary solution that makes engineers jealous. Anyway, Robert Gates announced the production cap in April 2009, 187 airframes. The original 750 had already bled down to 381, then 277. Gates argued the F-35 would fill the gap. The cost per airframe argument dominated, roughly $361 million per Raptor, when development costs spread across the shrunken fleet. The F-35's projected unit cost at the time sat around $83 million. Those projections aged poorly. We have to accept some risk. Gates used that phrase in his press conference. The Pentagon transcript preserves it. Risk meant fielding fewer air superiority fighters than any threat assessment recommended, betting that stealth technology wouldn't proliferate fast enough to close the gap. China's J-20 flew 19 months later, 187 jets to cover every theater on Earth. Subtract training aircraft, maintenance rotations, depot-level overhauls. The deployable fleet on any given day hovers around 120, spread across the Pacific, Europe, the Middle East, the homeland. The most dominant air superiority platform ever built, and the Air Force can't put more than a few dozen in any single fight. Major Gruenwald left the Raptor community in 2010 for a staff assignment at the Pentagon. Asked years later whether 144-0 could happen again in real combat, he gave a one-sentence answer. Depends on how many missiles we bring. A small brass plate on the wall of the 1st Fighter Wing's Heritage Room at Joint Base Langley Eustis lists every air-to-air engagement credited to the wing since 1918. The Raptor's entry is blank, not because it failed, because nobody showed up to fight it. The F-22 has never fired a shot in air-to-air combat. The aircraft built to dominate every fighter on Earth achieved something stranger than dominance. Deterrence so complete that the engagement column stays empty. Syrian pilots turned back when Raptors entered their airspace during Operation Inherent Resolve. Russian Su-35s shadowing coalition aircraft over the Euphrates broke contact when F-22s lit them up on radar. The Iranian Air Force grounded sorties near the Iraqi border on days when Raptor deployments showed up on their intelligence feeds. They just left. Lieutenant Colonel Daniel Dickinson, a Raptor pilot who flew missions over Syria in 2017, told Air Force Times, "We'd get the call that adversary aircraft were inbound, set up the intercept, and they'd reverse course before we got within 60 miles. The jet's combat record reads like a footnote. 8 air-to-ground strikes during Inherent Resolve, dropping GPS-guided small-diameter bombs on Islamic State targets in September 2014, its first combat employment, 13 years after reaching initial operational capability. 8 bombs, from the most expensive fighter program in history. The Pentagon's Acquisition Office tracked total program cost at $67.3 billion across all 187 production aircraft and the development cycle. Divide that across the fleet. Divide it across the decades of service life remaining. The math changes depending on what number goes on the bottom, and the procurement critics never lacked for large numbers to put on top. The production line at Lockheed Martin's Marietta, Georgia facility closed in December 2011. Final aircraft, tail number 094191, rolled out with the standard two-tone air superiority gray scheme. Workers signed the inside of an access panel. The tooling went into storage. Some of it got scrapped. Congress requested and received a classified briefing in 2010 on the feasibility of restarting production. The Government Accountability Office estimated a restart would cost roughly $17 billion before a single new airframe left the factory. The proposal died in committee. Sources conflict on the exact final tally from Northern Edge 2006. The commonly cited figure, 144-0, appears in Air Force magazine's reporting and in multiple pilot interviews from the period. The exercise's official after-action report carries a classification marking of secret/NOFORN and remains unreleased. Joint Pacific-Alaska Range Complex filed the ACMI data under exercise reference number NE-06-001. The scorecard sits in a server at Elmendorf. Clearance required.